So in the last video, we looked at Singer's basic argument. And I think it's important to think that through in terms of how it's being applied. The argument is suffering and death from lack of resources is bad. That's the first principle. Second one is that if it is in our power to prevent something bad from happening without sacrificing anything of any moral significance, then we ought to do it. So the application would simply be, okay, people in East Bengal are suffering from lack of resources. It is in our power to do something about it, to prevent that from happening without sacrificing anything of moral significance. Therefore, we ought to help the people of East Bengal, or apply it to any people suffering any part of the world. I think it's pretty simple. The question is, how much ought we to give? Questions about marginal utility, that is, giving to the point where if we gave any more, we would be sinking below the level of the people we're trying to help. I don't know how important those things really are. I mean, I think that the more important thing is that we're, by our own admission, if we accept the premises of his argument, morally obligated to do something. And one of the outcomes, as he says here, this is the top of page 840, is that we should realize that if we accept his argument, that we are truly morally obligated to do something to help these people. And that it isn't something that is purely something that would be nice to do or good to do. It would be something that would be wrong not to do, which is something I really want to emphasize here. He says, and again, this is the top of page 840, the outcome of this argument is that our traditional moral categories are upset. Now, what traditional moral categories is he talking about? The traditional distinction between duty and charity. Those are the moral categories. Duty on the one hand and charity on the other. That our traditional way of conceiving these things is necessarily changed. The traditional distinction between duty and charity cannot be drawn, or at least not in the place we normally draw it. Giving money to the Bengal Relief Fund is regarded as an act of charity in our society. That is something that's good to do, but you're not morally required to do, would be charity. The bodies which collect money are known as charities. These organizations see themselves in this way. If you send them a check, you'll be thanked for your, quote, generosity. Because giving money is regarded as an act of charity, it is not thought that there is anything wrong with not giving. Right? This is the usual view that he says turns out to be false, actually. The charitable man may be praised, but the man who is not charitable is not condemned. People do not feel in any way ashamed or guilty about spending money on new clothes or a new car instead of giving it to famine relief. Indeed, the alternative does not occur to them. This way of looking at the matter cannot be justified. That is, and he's right. If you accept the premises of his argument, you have a moral obligation to give to charity, to at least some extent. And it's not something that would be good to do, but it would not be wrong not to do. It's something that would be wrong not to do. And anybody who's using their money, let's say, to go out to dinner or to buy a nicer car or nicer clothes instead of giving it to charity is infringing on the principles that he said, we started with. When we buy new clothes, not to keep ourselves warm, but to look well dressed, we are not providing for any important need. I guess we'll all have to think about that for ourselves. We would not be sacrificing anything significant if we were to continue to wear our old clothes and give the money to famine relief. That he's not asking you to walk around naked in the cold. That would be sacrificing something morally significant. He's asking you not to buy clothes just because you like the way that you look in them, rather than giving that money to prevent suffering and death. If you need a car to get to work, he's not asking you to give up your job. But if you buy a new car, not because you need it to get to work, but because you like the way it looks or way it makes you feel to drive in it, then you are going against the principle, because sacrificing that new car or those new clothes for the sake of giving to charity is not sacrificing anything that he would regard as being morally significant. Now, you may disagree with him about it being of no moral significance, but then you'd be engaged in an argument of that sort. We would not be sacrificing anything significant if we were to continue to wear our old clothes and give the money to family relief. By doing so, we would be preventing another person from starving. It follows from what I've said earlier that we ought to give money away rather than spend it on clothes which we do not need to keep us warm. To do so is not charitable or generous, nor is it the kind of act which philosophers and theologians have called supererogatory. And look up that word. He defines it here, an act which it would be good to do, but not wrong not to do. That's an important distinction. On the contrary, we ought to give the money away, and it is wrong not to do so. So I just want to focus on this section because it's so important. This distinction between, on the one hand, saying, well, it's good to do that. It's very good to do that. But it's above and beyond, meaning anybody who does that is good. But if they had not done it, it wouldn't mean that they were bad. That's our usual way of thinking of like giving to charities for people starving on the other side of the world. Under his argument, again, if you accept his premises and if you accept the idea that distance is not a factor, then it's rather the last thing he says there. We ought to give the money away, and it is wrong not to do so. That is, it's a moral obligation to give the money. So if you fail to give the money, you are morally remiss. Again, morally remiss, right? This is all a moral argument. This is about what our duties are. And those are established, again, dialectically by the premises that he starts with. And so basically what he's saying is, if you accept my premises, then you also accept the duties that follow from them, which is, pretty strong argument, because if you don't like the argument, then, well, where's the flaw in the argument? Is it in the premises? Is it in the implications that follow from the premises? So if you're going to argue against Singer, you have to, you can't just sort of wave it away. You have to see, well, where did he make a mistake? If indeed he did.